The Zelvari dropships descended through the ash-choked sky above New Jakarta, their sleek hulls cutting through the smoke rising from the burning city below. Commander Zektar stood at the observation deck of the lead vessel, his 4 arms crossed behind his crystalline exoskeleton as he studied the battlefield data streaming across his neural display. Another human settlement falls, his lieutenant, Crixon, commented with satisfaction. Their primitive projectile weapons cannot penetrate our energy shields. This conquest grows tedious. Zektar's mandibles clicked in agreement. The Galactic Coalition had expected more resistance from Earth's military forces. But after 6 months of systematic invasion, humanity's defenses had crumbled like dried leaves. The humans fought with admirable determination, but their technology was centuries behind Coalition standards. Deploy ground forces to Sector 7, Zektar ordered. Intelligence reports a small human garrison holding the industrial district. Eliminate them and secure the manufacturing facilities intact. The dropships landed with practiced precision, disgorging hundreds of Zelvari warriors in their powered armor. Each soldier stood 8 feet tall, their suits amplifying their already impressive strength and providing complete protection against human small arms fire. Energy weapons hummed to life as they advanced through the rubble-strewn streets. Private Chan Wei pressed himself deeper into the shadows of a collapsed office building, his breathing shallow despite the searing pain in his left shoulder. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage he'd torn from his uniform, and his left arm hung useless at his side. The rest of his squad lay scattered across the street behind him, their bodies still smoking from the Zelvari plasma fire that had torn through them minutes ago. He'd been lucky, if you could call it that. The collapsing wall had knocked him clear of the worst of the blast, though shrapnel had torn through his shoulder and rendered his assault rifle useless. Now he watched through a gap in the rubble as the alien warriors marched past, their heavy footsteps crushing debris beneath them. Chen's fingers found the familiar weight of his father's old hunting rifle, pulled from museum display when the invasion began. The ancient bolt-action weapon seemed pathetic compared to the aliens' technology, but it was all he had left. 5 rounds in the magazine, 20 more in his pocket, against an entire Zelvari battalion. The aliens moved with casual arrogance, not bothering with cover or tactical spacing. Why would they? Their shields had proven impervious to everything humanity had thrown at them. Chun watched as they congregated near an intersection, their commander gesturing toward different streets as he divided his forces. Through his scope, Chun studied the aliens' armor. The energy shields shimmered like heat mirages around each warrior, deflecting dust and small debris. But Chun noticed something the aliens seemed to have forgotten in their superiority complex. The shields pulsed in a rhythm, cycling every few seconds. During each cycle, there was a fraction of a second where the shimmer faded at the joints where the armor plates connected. His father had taught him patience on those long hunting trips in the mountains of Taiwan. A good hunter becomes part of the environment, the old man would say. The mountain doesn't move, doesn't breathe, doesn't think. Be the mountain, and your prey will never see you coming. Chun became the mountain. The Zelvari commander raised his arm to signal the advance. In that moment, the shield cycled at his shoulder joint. Chen's rifle whispered death across 600 meters of ruined cityscape. The commander's arm separated from his body in a spray of orange blood, the heavy rifle round having found the microscopic gap in his defenses. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The Zelvari stared at their commander as he collapsed, his life fluids pooling beneath him. Then chaos erupted. Energy weapons fired wildly at buildings, at shadows, at anything that might hide a threat. Orders were screamed in their guttural language as soldiers scrambled for cover they'd never thought they'd need. Chun was already moving, crawling through a maintenance tunnel he'd scouted earlier. His shoulder screamed with each movement, but he ignored it. Pain was just another sensation, no different from the cold metal against his belly or the acrid smoke in his nostrils. He emerged 4 blocks away, taking position in a burned-out apartment complex. The Zelvari were still firing at his previous position, Their formation now bunched together as they sought safety in numbers. A tactical error. Through his scope, Chen identified the next officer by the command markings on his armor. He waited, breathing steady despite the fire in his shoulder. The shield cycled. The rifle spoke. Another alien fell, his throat opened by a round that found the gap beneath his helmet. The Zelvari panic intensified. They couldn't understand how their impenetrable defenses were failing. Their technology couldn't detect the primitive chemical-propelled projectiles until they'd already struck. Their sensors, calibrated for energy weapons and modern threats, ignored the ancient rifle as background noise. Zektar watched the chaos unfold through his command display, his mandibles clicking in frustration. 2 officers dead, morale crumbling, and they couldn't even locate the attacker. "Commander," Crixon's voice crackled through the comm. "Should we call for orbital bombardment and destroy the facilities we came to capture?" Zektar snarled. "Find that human and kill it." But finding Chun was like hunting a ghost. He moved constantly, never firing from the same position twice. Each shot was calculated, patient, devastating. He targeted officers first, then communication specialists, then heavy weapon operators. Without leadership and coordination, the Zelvari battalion descended into chaos. Chen lined up another shot, this time on a soldier, trying to establish a communications relay. His hands were steady despite the blood loss, making his vision blur at the edges. The crosshairs settled on the gap where the alien's chest plate met his shoulder guard. He began to squeeze the trigger. The building shook as a plasma blast tore through the floor below him. They'd finally triangulated his position. Chen rolled aside as the ceiling began to collapse. His rifle clutched against his chest. More explosions followed as the Zelvari poured fire into the structure. He tumbled through a hole in the floor, landing hard on his wounded shoulder. Black spots danced across his vision as agony shot through his body. When he could see again, he found himself in a basement, the building above groaning as it settled into ruins. Chen checked his rifle. Still functional, though the scope had been knocked out of alignment. He had 12 rounds left. His shoulder was bleeding freely now, the bandage lost in his fall. He could hear Zelvari voices above, see the glow of their lights as they searched the rubble. Most soldiers would have surrendered or made a desperate last stand. Chen did neither. He crawled into a storm drain, letting the polluted water carry him away from the search area. The Zelvari technology couldn't track him through the mix of sewage, chemicals, and corroded metal that filled the old drainage system. He emerged a kilometer away, near the ruins of a shopping district. His body shook from shock and blood loss, but his mind remained focused. The Zelvari had learned caution now, moving in tight formations with overlapping fields of fire. But caution made them predictable. Chun found an overturned delivery truck and crawled beneath it. Through a gap in the wreckage, he could see the aliens advancing down the main avenue. They'd adapted their tactics, keeping their joints protected, weapons ready. It didn't matter. Chen had adapted too. He aimed for equipment now rather than bodies. A shot through an energy weapon's power cell created a devastating explosion. A round through a shield generator left its wearer suddenly, vulnerable to their own allies' panic fire. Each shot sowed more chaos, more fear. The psychological warfare was as effective as the physical damage. The Zelvari had conquered dozens of worlds, faced countless enemies, but they'd never encountered this. A single wounded human with an obsolete weapon was dismantling their entire battalion through patience and precision. Lieutenant Crixon ducked involuntarily as another of his soldiers fell, their weapon detonating in a ball of plasma. The battalion had lost 30 soldiers, including half their officers. Worse than the casualties was the fear spreading through the ranks. They jumped at shadows, fired at every sound, their superior technology and training forgotten in the face of an enemy they couldn't see or predict. "Fall back to the dropships," he ordered, his voice cracking with stress. "Defensive positions until reinforcements arrive." The retreat began orderly, but quickly devolved as soldiers ran for the perceived safety of their landing zone. Chen watched them go, too weak now to pursue. He bought time, nothing more. But sometimes time was all that mattered. As the last Zelvari disappeared around a corner, Chun finally allowed himself to slump against the truck's tire. His rifle fell from nerveless fingers as darkness crept in from the edges of his vision. In the distance, he could hear human voices, survivors emerging from hiding as word spread of the aliens' retreat. Chin smiled weakly as unconsciousness took him. He'd shown them that humanity's strength didn't lie in technology or numbers. It lay in the determination of individuals who refused to yield, who could turn primitive weapons into instruments of fear through skill and courage alone. The battle for New Jakarta was far from over, but its tide had turned. And across the galaxy, the Zelvari would speak in hushed tones of Earth's invisible death, the ghost that killed with ancient thunder and disappeared like smoke. The invasion of Earth had just become far more complicated than anyone in the Galactic Coalition had anticipated. The medical tent smelled of antiseptic and desperation. Chun Wei drifted in and out of consciousness, his fevered dreams mixing with the voices around him. Sometimes he was back in the ruins, lining up impossible shots. Other times he was a child again, learning to hold his breath and squeeze the trigger under his father's watchful eye. Dr. Sarah Martinez worked frantically to save his life. The wounded sniper had become something of a legend in the past 3 days since the Zelvari retreat. Survivors whispered about the ghost who'd sent an entire alien battalion running with nothing but an antique rifle and raw determination. His shoulders infected, she told Colonel Harrison, the ranking officer among the survivors. Without proper antibiotics, I don't know if he'll make it. Harrison studied the unconscious soldier, noting the peaceful expression despite his critical condition. Do what you can. If half the stories are true, this man gave us something we desperately needed. Hope. Outside the makeshift hospital, New Jakarta's survivors worked to fortify their positions. The aliens would return, everyone knew that. But Chin's actions had proven the Zelvari weren't invincible. More importantly, word had spread beyond the city. Radio intercepts suggested similar incidents were occurring worldwide as humanity learned to exploit the weaknesses Chun had discovered. In orbit above Earth, Supreme Commander Vextor convened an emergency session of the Coalition's Military Council. The holographic forms of his fellow commanders flickered in the conference chamber, their expressions grim. 17 battalions have reported similar attacks, the Kethari representative stated, her feathered crest fluttering with agitation. Single human snipers using primitive weapons to inflict significant casualties before disappearing. Impossible, General Mordak of the Brutari contingent growled. Our shields are rated against weapons far more powerful than their chemical projectiles. Vextor brought up a technical analysis on the main display. The humans have identified a critical flaw in our shield cycling patterns. During the refresh cycle, gaps appear in the armor joints for approximately 0.3 seconds. The humans are timing their shots to exploit these windows. Then, we modify the cycling pattern, Mordak suggested. We've tried. Randomizing the patterns causes power fluctuations that actually create larger gaps. Maintaining constant shields would drain our power cells within hours. Vextor's 4 eyes narrowed. We must accept that our technological superiority has bred complacency. The humans have reminded us that warfare is not won by technology alone. The Council erupted in debate. Some called for immediate orbital bombardment of all population centers. Others argued for a temporary withdrawal to reassess their strategy. Vextor silenced them with a sharp gesture. We will adapt, as warriors must. Deploy the Shadow Guard units to hunt these snipers. And implement Protocol 7 for all ground operations. The other commanders exchanged uneasy glances. Protocol 7 hadn't been used since the Coalition's early days, when they faced genuinely threatening opponents. It meant treating the enemy as equals, with full tactical protocols and maximum caution. For a species as primitive as humanity, It was almost insulting to coalition pride. Back on Earth, Chun finally opened his eyes to find a young woman in medical scrubs checking his bandages. His movement made her jump. "You're awake. Don't try to move. You've lost a lot of blood." Chin's voice came out as a raspy whisper. "The aliens? Gone for now. Your actions gave us time to evacuate civilians and establish better positions. The colonel wants to debrief you when you're stronger." Over the following days, Chin recovered slowly. His left arm would never regain full function, the nerve damage too severe. But his right hand remained steady and his eyes sharp. As he healed, a stream of visitors came to see the legendary sniper. Captain Lisa Park, leading the city's remaining special forces, was particularly interested in his tactics. "The shield cycling pattern. How did you spot it?" "Patience," Chin replied simply. "They were arrogant, careless. When you expect your enemy to be harmless, you don't watch for dangers. I had hours to observe before taking my first shot. We've been teaching your technique to other marksmen. The aliens have started randomizing their patterns, but that causes power fluctuations we can spot with thermal scopes." Chin nodded thoughtfully. "They'll adapt further. We need to stay ahead." What Chin didn't know was that his actions had triggered something larger. Across Earth, military units were rediscovering the art of asymmetric warfare. Snipers became the stuff of nightmares for Zelvari patrols. Some used modern rifles with specially modified ammunition. Others, inspired by Chin's example, employed older weapons the alien sensors struggled to detect. Maria Santos in Sao Paulo used her grandfather's World War II rifle to eliminate an entire Zelvari command post. Jake Thompson in Denver, a competitive long-range shooter before the invasion, turned his custom-built rifle into an alien's nightmare, picking off targets at ranges exceeding a mile. In Moscow, Svetlana Volkov used the city's abandoned buildings to create a maze of death, taking down 53 aliens over 2 weeks before vanishing into the underground. The Zelvari response was swift and brutal. The Shadow Guard, their elite hunter-killer units, deployed across Earth's major cities. Unlike regular troops, these specialists used active camouflage, enhanced sensors, and predictive targeting algorithms. They moved like ghosts themselves, hunting the human snipers with ruthless efficiency. Chun watched from his hospital bed as reports came in. Dallas had fallen silent after Shadow Guard units eliminated their sniper cell. London's resistance crumbled when their marksmen were tracked through the city's ancient tunnels. For every success story, there seemed to be 2 tragedies. "I need to get back out there," he told Dr. Martinez during one of her visits. "With one functioning arm? You'll be dead within hours." "Then, I'll take a few more with me." Martinez sighed, having expected this. "What if there was another way?" "Colonel Harrison wants to see you. He has a proposal." Harrison arrived within the hour, accompanied by Captain Park and several other officers. They gathered around Chin's bed, their expressions serious. "The Shadow Guard are adapting faster than we anticipated," Harrison began. "We need to evolve our tactics again. Individual snipers had their moment, but now we need something more coordinated." He produced a tablet showing tactical displays. "We want you to train others, not just in marksmanship, but in the patience and observation skills that made you successful. Create a network of snipers who can work together, supporting each other, sharing intelligence." Chun studied the plans. "The aliens will concentrate their Shadow Guard to hunt us. We'll be painting targets on these people." "Yes," Park admitted. "But while they hunt our snipers, our regular forces can hit their supply lines and communications. It's a shell game, but one that might buy us time for a real counteroffensive." Chun was quiet for a long moment. His soldier's instincts warred with the practical knowledge that he was more valuable as a teacher now than as a lone wolf. Finally, he nodded. "We'll need to be smart about recruitment. Not just good shots, but people who can think, adapt, disappear. And we'll need better equipment. The old rifles worked because they weren't expected. That advantage is gone." Over the following weeks, Chun established what became known as the Ghost School. Hidden in an abandoned subway station, he taught a carefully selected group of soldiers and civilians the art of patience, observation, and precision killing. Some were military snipers who needed to unlearn habits that made them predictable. Others were hunters, sport shooters, or simply people with steady hands and steadier nerves. Lisa Chun, no relation despite the shared surname, was a former Olympic biathlete who could control her heartbeat with uncanny precision. Miguel Rodriguez brought knowledge from his time as a cartel sicario, skills he now turned against humanity's invaders. Emma Watson, barely 19, had grown up hunting deer with her father and possessed an almost supernatural ability to gauge wind and distance. Chun taught them more than marksmanship. He showed them how to read alien body language, to spot the subtle signs of an impending shield cycle. They learned to move through rubble without disturbing a single stone, to use water and metal to mask their heat signatures, to think 3 shots ahead like chess players. Remember, he told them during one lesson, you're not just snipers. You're psychological weapons. Every shot should create fear, uncertainty. Make them doubt their technology, their tactics, their superiority. The students practiced on captured armor pieces, learning exactly where the weak points formed during shield cycles. They studied Zelvari anatomy, identifying critical points that would cause maximum damage with minimal exposure. Most importantly, they learned patience. The first coordinated operation came 3 weeks later. The Zelvari had established a forward base in the ruins of Jakarta's financial district, using it to coordinate search and destroy missions against human survivors. The aliens had learned from their earlier mistakes, maintaining constant patrols and overlapping fields of fire. Chin watched from a concealed observation post as his students took their positions. 12 snipers spread across a square kilometer, each with specific targets and escape routes. The Shadow Guard were out there too, he knew, waiting for the first shot to reveal a shooter's position. Emma fired first, her rifle suppressor reducing the sound to a whisper. A Zelvari communications tech fell, the shot timed perfectly with the shield cycle. Before the aliens could react, Miguel's shot took down a sentry on the opposite side of the compound. Then, Lisa from the north, James from the east, each shot coming from a